Today's texts address the reality of human suffering, the debilitating cost of chronic disease, the death of a child, the cry of despair. We read that God comes to those in pain with healing and grace, restoring life and hope, offering the abundance of steadfast love, and bringing peace to troubled souls. This is the vision of living in God's peace, where all find healing and personal peace, and where everyone has enough to thrive. In response to God's amazing gifts of grace, healing, and hope, we are called to build a community where people can find healing and peace, and where people can have enough to thrive. We do this by living generous lives, offering from our abundance that others might simply live. In order to get to these themes, I want to share with you about 2 books and commentary today. First is this wonderful children's book, La Gallinita, El Gallo y el Frijol. This is from my kids' childhood. I read to them every day. It's the hen, the rooster, and the bean. So I'm just going to briefly tell you, and I'm going to do it in English for you, if that's all right, unless you want the Spanish. So here is a map. So it's a map, and then we'll get into the story. But here's a map. There's a river, and here is the chicken and the rooster, and they're scratching out in the yard. And across the river is some flowers. And then there's a whittler making a comb, and then we have a girl making string or knitting or something. We have a baker, and we have a woodcutter. So on a beautiful morning, the chickens are out doing what chickens do, and the little hen finds a bean, and she says, "My beloved rooster, take it and eat it." And he does, but he chokes. Can you see him choking? And he says, "Please go get me a drink of water." And she's in a panic. Her beloved rooster's choking, so she runs to the river to get some water and asks the river, "Please give me water." And the river says, "Sure, but I need a flower for my water." So she runs to the flowers. "Please, I need one of your flowers." And the vine says, "Well, I need a string." So she runs to the girl with the string. And don't you know that the girl with the string needs to comb her hair? So she goes to the whittler, but he's hungry. He wants bread from the baker. And the baker can't fire up his oven because he needs wood. So she runs to the woodcutter, and every single time she's there, she says, "Please, please, my friend, my beloved rooster is choking. Please, I need help. Please help me, help me." And every time she is met with, "Well, I'll help you, but first, I need this." So she runs to the woodcutter and does her spiel, "Please, please, please help me, I beg you." And the woodcutter, here he is, like that mustache. The woodcutter stops. He has compassion on the little hen. That's the word used in the story. It's compassion for her. He gives her the wood. Now begins the running. She runs back and gives everybody what they asked for, until she finally, of course, has her cup of water for the rooster. He swallows the bean, and he's able to give a loud kee-kee-kee, cock-a-doodle-doo. He's fine. Everything is well in their world. This is what we do. We run around panicking, looking to others for assistance with our problems, but everyone has a catch. I'll help you if you help me first. Until we come to the woodcutter, who is so full of compassion for our state of being. that generosity is immediately given to us for our needs. For that moment, we are still. No running around, no panic. Our needs are met. Who is that woodcutter? God has all resources and all compassion for us. God is the woodcutter. But we must also be the woodcutter, because we have been given our example in Christ. We are to have love for God and compassion for our neighbors in the primary spots in our hearts. And we need to let our compassion be our first response to others. In our compassion, our neighbors will see the love of God. Our church here at Second Reformed does show compassion and giving, as Paul asked the Corinthians in our reading today. Paul was asking one church in Corinth to provide for the great needs in Jerusalem. He reminded his readers that Jesus left the wealth of God's presence to join us here in our poverty. Jesus shared himself with us. Paul also referred to the Israelites wandering in the desert in 2 Corinthians 8:15. And I don't know if any, we have the Pew Bibles back. So if you didn't bring your own, I invite you to open your scriptures up as we keep referring to them. But in 2 Corinthians 8:15, Paul actually quotes Exodus 16, verse 18. Whoever had much did not have more, and whoever had little did not have less. This quote from Exodus is from the story of when God provided manna from heaven. God provided equally according to God's will, and not according to individual exertion. Remember that story? The Israelites were allowed to take all that they needed and nothing more, but all were satisfied and provided for according to God's will. Anyone earning more by gathering more would not be rewarded for their efforts, because the manna would ruin. It would stink and be full of worms. Taking what they could take for their needs and then sharing it together so that no one had too much or too little was God's will and God's command. Paul reminds the Corinthians that their abundance should be shared with others, but not to the point of their own impoverishment. They don't have to give until it hurts, but they do need to share as other churches will share with them in their own need, so that God's people will all be cared for equally. And nowadays, we might hear or say, we're paying it forward. But that's a transactional phrase. It implies, I'm investing in my future by sharing with you now. But that wouldn't be quite what Paul means here. Giving from an abundance is supposed to be an act of compassion. And we are to trust that God's compassion for us will manifest in the sharing of abundance from another source, if or when we need it. Paying it forward is our way of running around like a hen looking for water. Sharing out of compassion is God's way of providing that firewood for whomever needs it. In recent years, Second Reformed Church has financially supported the installation of a walk-in freezer for the food pantry. We have contributed to neighboring churches whose foundations have collapsed, whose basements have flooded. And last week, Consistory agreed to cover the remaining and significant cost for our Methodist siblings. They're converting their heating system. We do this because we have an abundance. We do not give until it hurts, but we can share, and we can do the work of caring that we started, the way the Corinthians cared about the church at Jerusalem, and then continued to care by following through with financial stewardship. Our sibling churches here in Coxsackie help our neighbors by providing spiritual guidance, food supplies, more meals, clothing gifts, and thrift stores that allow those with limited resources some autonomy over choosing their own belongings. all of these acts by our neighboring churches are acts of compassion. And our sharing with them is just part of that compassion. Stewardship means supporting where support is needed, and not just in a manner that we choose or specify. We don't have to be in charge of everything. We just have to listen to those in need and respond immediately with compassion, like the woodcutter did for the little hen. Stewardship stems from compassion, and we know who first had compassion for us, our Creator God. In our gospel reading today, we hear about Jesus' compassion as he healed the woman who touched him, and we hear about Jesus' compassion as he raised from death the 12-year-old girl. Mark tells us that the sick woman had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She believed that if she could just touch Jesus, just the hem of his garment, that she would get well. She reaches out and touches his cloak, and she's cured. Her story is captivating. Her story makes us re-examine our faith and the mystery around us. That which can't be explained and is beyond reason. A Presbyterian minister and author, Rick Brand, writes that whether you call it mystery or grace, Christianity has always been filled with elements that involve a trust in something supernatural, something we cannot always understand. Over the years, he says, we have attempted to make the Christian faith rational. We add rules. We explain why we do what we do. But there's more to human life than just reason. There is a mind and a heart and mystery and wonder and powers and principalities we can't explain. Jesus invites us to love the Lord our God with all of our minds, which means that we are to use and respect and appreciate the power of reason in our minds. And we are to love the Lord with all our hearts and emotions and instincts. And we are to offer our souls and commit ourselves to the grace of God that surrounds us. If we can just touch the grace of God, as the sick woman in our gospel did, then our sin-sick world can be healed. Now, Reverend Lou Vandermeer, an author and former minister with the Christian Reformed Church, takes this theme of acknowledging and accepting the compassion of Christ and being compassionate to all others. But he does it a little differently. He wants to do it by eliminating what he calls churchism. We have used Vandermeer's Bible studies in our youth classes and in our adult classes. Downstairs we used to study on the Belgic Confession to know what Reformed faiths testify and believe. And just recently, Pastor Carolyn used his God Wins study on the book of Revelation. I think that's still ongoing. I just started reading his 2011 book, Recovering from Churchism, How to Renew, Grow, and Celebrate Your Church. He has some interesting ideas. If anyone wants to read along with me, that would be great. Just let me know. So according to Vandermeer, churchism is building and people management without the heart for service to others that really should be the hallmark of our faith. He says some major signs of churchism are meetings, the longer the better, church policies, established or tweaked to dictate congregational behavior, often being nipped and tucked to scuttle whatever they personally dislike. And I would like to point out that Reverend Vandermeer did not write during a long, politically disjointed era, which includes civil rights unrest, an unprecedented worldwide refugee movement, and a pandemic. His era is not our era. But can we use this list as a jumping point for self-reflection and self-improvement? So another sign of churchism, Vandermeer says, is committees. Too many committees. Another is fear of adventure. Churches like the status quo, even if it's dead end. and they don't like unique or unusual people or behaviors. Membership standards. Churches like to be with people who are just like them. No different types of sinners are made welcome. Vacant buildings. Churches appreciate a secure, energy-saving facility that doesn't need to be accessed during the week except by those printed bulletins and policy statements. And again, we are emerging from a pandemic, which meant that our building did need to be closed. But we take his point. Finally, one of the signs of churches is agendas and minutes. Churches measure progress by the quantity of minutiae stored on the secretary's computer. Vandermeer says that any congregation with at least 5 of these symptoms suffers from churchism. Now, I haven't finished the book. I'm just getting started. So far, it's a pretty fun read. I hope it has good ideas for building a safe place for others to grow in their faith. Because that's the real purpose in his writing. To show people that it's okay to let God's compassion for you overwhelm you to the point that you can be completely open and real with others about faith, without fear of speaking out of turn or breaking a policy. God's love is bigger than that. From what I can tell, he isn't preaching anarchy. But let me know if you want to read it, and you can find out what he is preaching there. From my experience with this author, I know that the words he speaks will be well considered, weighted with reformed wisdom, and full of patient compassion. Jesus' words to us today are also filled with wisdom, compassion, and love. Let's hear them again. In Mark 5:34, Jesus said to the woman who touched him, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." And in 5:38, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." Friends, there is no need to fear, no need to panic, to run from person to person, situation to situation, to have our needs met. We have only to trust our needs to God, to turn to God, and be still. As we learn from God's gifts to us, we must continue to share from our abundance, praising God for our resources and asking God to open our hearts to continue showing compassion to our neighbors. So let us go out into the world more captivated by God's grace and mystery than we are bogged down in churchism, so that when we meet with others, they can immediately see God's love in us. Let us actively practice self-reflection so that we can see God's love in ourselves too. Please join me in prayer. Loving God, let your word speak to our hearts. Come and heal our brokenness and restore us to life. Comfort our grieving hearts. Teach us to share from our abundance. By your word, transform us into your holy people, full of compassion and love for others. Amen.